Genesis chapter 14, verses 1 to 24. In the days of Amraphel, king of Shinar, Arioch, king of Elasar, Kedorlaomer, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of Goyim, these kings made war with Bera, king of Sodom, Bersha, king of Gomorrah, Shinab, king of Admah, Shemeber, king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, that is, Zoar. And all these joined forces in the valley of Siddim, that is, the Salt Sea. 12 years they had served Kedorlaomer, but in the 13th year they rebelled. In the 14th year, Kedorlaomer and the kings who were with him came and defeated the Rephaim in Ashtaroth Karnaim, the Zuzim in Ham, the Emim in Sheva Kiriathim, and the Horites in the hill country of Seir, as far as El-Paran on the border of the wilderness. Then they turned back and came to En-Mishpat, that is, Kadesh, and defeated all the country of the Amalekites, and also the Amorites who were dwelling in Hazazon Tamar. Then the king of Sodom, the king of Gomorrah, the king of Admah, the king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, that is Zoar, went out, and they joined battle in the valley of Siddim, with Kedorlaomer king of Elam, Tidal king of Goyim, Amraphel king of Shinar, and Arioch king of Elasar, 4 kings against 5. Now the valley of Siddim was full of bitumen pits, and as the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled, some fell into them, and the rest fled to the hill country. So the enemy took all the possessions of Sodom and Gomorrah, and all their provisions, and went their way. They also took Lot, the son of Abram's brother, who was dwelling in Sodom, and his possessions, and went their way. Then one who had escaped came and told Abram the Hebrew, who was living by the oaks of Mamre the Amorite, brother of Eshcol and of Anah. These were allies of Abram. When Abram heard that his kinsman had been taken captive, he led forth his trained men, born in his house, 318 of them, and went in pursuit as far as Dan. And he divided his forces against them by night, he and his servants, and defeated them, and pursued them to Hobah, north of Damascus. Then he brought back all the possessions, and also brought back his kinsman Lot with his possessions, and the women and the people. After his return from the defeat of Kedorlaomer and the kings who were with him, the king of Sodom went out to meet him at the valley of Sheva, that is, the king's valley. And Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was priest of God Most High. And he blessed him and said, Blessed be Abram by God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand. And Abram gave him 1/10 of everything. And the king of Sodom said to Abram, Give me the persons, but take the goods for yourself. But Abram said to the king of Sodom, I have lifted my hand to the Lord, God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, that I would not take a thread or a sandal strap or anything that is yours, lest you should say, I have made Abram rich. I will take nothing but what the young men have eaten, and the share of the men who went with me. Let Anah, Eshcol, and Mamre take their share.
As I thought about Sianda showing some of those pictures of those babies, and then also this at our morning services we had baby dedications, it made me think about my own complex relationship with my father. And so the old man is still alive, and him and I talk now and again, but we are not that close. And that is because as we were growing up, he was too busy, and so we never really had much time to spend with one another, and hence this somewhat the complex relationship that I've got with my father. And yet that's not the only thing that's true about my dad. And so my dad was also a man who had a great desire to want to actually provide for his family and to protect his family at all costs. And there's no situation that speaks to the latter best in my life than that one fateful evening back in the early 1990s. And so at the time, I was around about like 8 or 10 years old. We were living in the DRC, that is Congo. And just a political situation in the country at that time was so volatile that on multiple occasions you would have actually army-led looting across some of the cities in that country. And so Kinshasa, the capital where we were living at the time, had literally turned into a war zone. And so you could hear gunfire and grenade and rocket blasts all across the city because of the instability with the politics at that time. And so on that particular day, afternoon, I can remember my dad making it home back from work in the late afternoon and telling us that all hell had actually literally broken loose downtown. And so the army was actually just going through business after business, just pillaging, and then also going into some of the wealthy neighborhoods as well, taking whatever they wanted, and at times killing people along the way. And so as we barricaded ourselves in our home that evening, you could hear the gunfire happening at a distance, and all the blasts happening at a distance, but that sound just kept on getting closer and closer and closer until eventually at some point I started hearing it in our street, that they are mad in our street. And that's when I began to wonder, are they actually coming to our home? And so at some point, my brothers and I began kind of crawling towards the living room windows, because you don't want to stand in case you caught a stray bullet, right? And so we crawled to the living room windows and wanted to take a peek beyond the curtains. And as we pulled it to just see what was going on out there, to this day, I can't ever forget the terrifying sight that I saw. Paratroopers, heavily armed, scaling over our wall, landing onto our driveway, and actually beginning to break open the gate and allowing more of them in and their vehicles. And so I quickly then rushed and ran to my parents' bedroom and said, "Mom, Dad, soldiers are here." And then in an instant, my dad, put on his shirt, put on his slippers, and rushed back into the living room where his other children were. And my mom was running behind him asking, "What should we do?" And without even thinking about it, my dad said that he had to go out there and seek to try to de-escalate the situation before it got worse. And boom, off he went out the side door. And I can remember that night, even as I saw my dad disappear into the night, even as a young boy back there, then I just knew that he was taking a massive risk that could have actually ended in tragedy. I could just feel it in my stomach as I saw him disappear into the night, that perhaps that might have been the last time that we would see him alive. And so from the house, we could hear all of the commotion, all of the shouting that they were barking out at him. And in some way, sense, we were actually just kind of holding your breath, right, for those fateful shots. But they never came. And by the time the soldiers made it into the house, my dad had somehow managed to just calm them down. And so as they ransacked through the house, taking whatever they wanted, they didn't pay any attention to us. And then eventually they actually just left peacefully without even firing a shot. Now, we were obviously traumatized by that whole event that evening, didn't sleep at all, and also terrorized because there was a gun battle that was happening just the street up ahead of us as soldiers were coming up with militia in that sector of town that were looking to actually protect the homes, mounting up a resistance against them. And so you could hear all of the gunfire, you could hear all of the blasts that was going on throughout the night. But then in the morning, as we woke up, my dad was nowhere to be found. And so there we were. My dad couldn't find him for hours, and then he eventually came back home and brought along with him an armed militia. And so he had gone out into that chaos to actually recruit a militia to come and protect our home. And so as I think about my dad, and a man who was flawed with lots of imperfection, but there was a patriarch who was willing to risk everything, including his own life, in order to protect his family. Much like we will see in the text, Abram risked his own life as he looks to rescue and protect his kinsman and family, Lot. And so like Kinshasa, back in the early 1990s, the geopolitics of the region of the Jordan Valley had sort of kind of descended into kind of chaos. And it became a war zone round about the time Lot moved into the area. And as is always the case when it comes to such conflict, the innocent lives are placed at risk. And so what do we learn in the first 12 verses of the text? We see that Lot is actually taken captive as a prisoner of war. Now, the text, the first 12 verses, give us lots of detail explaining kind of what was going on. But in the midst of all of that detail, we cannot historically, conclusively, isolate or describe the various kings that they list or the locations that they came from. And so all we can make from the first 12 verses is that you have an alliance of 4 kings from the east, come down into the Jordan Valley, south into the Jordan Valley, and they proceed to just dust off, right? Everybody along their way, and then accumulating or capturing people and a great bounty, and then they choose to make it back north as they leave the region. Now, the only thing that these kings failed, did not realize or got wrong, right? Like if you have watched the movie Taken, they got this wrong. And what did they get wrong? They decided to take a member from the wrong family. They took a member from the wrong family. And so you can just totally see that famous scene from the movie. Those who've watched the movie, just that famous scene we remember so well, play itself out in verses 13 and 14. Then one who had escaped came and told Abram, and then what do we see? Verse 14, when Abram heard that his kinsman had been taken captive, what does he do? He led his trained men, and they went in pursuit as far as Dan. And so I can imagine if Abram had a cell phone, he would have totally given that famous speech from the movie Taken that Liam Neeson's character does, right? He would have picked up the phone and said, listen, I don't know who you are, and I don't know what you want. But what I do possess are a very particular set of skills that make me a nightmare for people like you. And so if you let my nephew go right now, that will be the end of it. I will not find you, I will not pursue you. But if you don't, I will come looking for you, I will find you, and I will kill you. Which is precisely what Abram does. Look at verses 15 to 16. And he divided his forces against them by night and defeated them. And then, verse 16, then he brought back all the possessions and also brought back his kinsman Lot with his possessions and the women and the people. And so against all odds, right, Abram is able to go up against these kings, risk everything, including his life, in order to protect his kinsman and family, Lot. Now, I said a few weeks ago, 2 weeks back, that what you have in Genesis 12 to 14 are 3 episodes that essentially put to the test God's threefold promise to Abram. And with each of these episodes, what do we learn? We learn something unique about God's grace towards us. And so in episode 1, we learned that God's grace towards us is just truly undeserving. Episode 2, we learned that God's grace towards us is just truly unchanging. And now in this particular episode, we will learn that God's grace towards us is just truly unfading. That it is just truly unfading, meaning that it will never give up and never run out on you. That God's grace will never give up and will never run out on us. Now we see this being put to the test in the third aspect of God's promise that this text particularly threatens in what we can actually label as Abram's suicide mission. Because how is Abram going to become the channel of God's blessing to the world if his life is prematurely cut short? That's the tension we ought to feel in the first 16 verses of this particular text when we, again, humanize it, like I've called us to do, not to just read these stories and fail to actually feel the nuances that these stories contain in its details. And so when you humanize it, you realize the kind of danger Abram was as he embarks on the suicide mission to go rescue his kinsman and family, Lot. For it was a suicide mission, meaning that Abram should have died. He should have died as he goes on the seek and rescue mission to rescue Lot because of what he was facing. And so what was he facing? He was outnumbered. Outnumbered. Now, anybody in their right mind, right, would think it laughable to think that Abram ever stood a chance against this alliance of 4 kings with his measly 318 men that the text tells us that he had. What are the odds of success against 4 nations with that number? Now, it's likely that that number would have been higher, as we read on that some of his allies go with him. That's Mamre and Eshcol and Anna went with him. And yet, if that number had been quite significant, then you bet that the author would have told us about it, instead of just mentioning the 318 men that he had. And so, not only is Abram outnumbered, but then second, he is outpowered. Now, I so wish I could have said outgunned, because that would have sounded like more Taken movie-ish, right? But it was before the days of such weaponry, and so we'll settle for outpowered. He's vastly outpowered on this mission. Because if you track where we can perhaps pinpoint where these various locations that these kings defeat on their campaign, and the distances that they had to travel to each one of those locations, it amounts to over 400 kilometers. 400 kilometers in this campaign. And so you begin to get a sense of how formidable an army these kings brought with them. And then add to that the fact that they had subdued that region for 12 years prior to that, verse 4 tells us. And then when they make their way down to come and actually squash the revolt that was happening, we're told from verses 8 to 12, not even a coalition of 5 kings against their forces of 4 was able to actually halt them. You begin to realize that this was such a powerful army that these 4 kings had. And so then how is Abram supposed to actually be victorious as he comes up against such an army? How is he to succeed where so many, as you read the text, had failed? Now, in my own life, I've been in plenty of fights that I'm not proud of, but I've been in quite a few fights, and some of them were against people that were a lot bigger and stronger than me. Now, I'll tell you the sheer terror that you have whenever you face people that are stronger, bigger than you. It's terrifying to just know that you're about to get your own backside handed to you. It's a terrifying thing. It can make you sick to your stomach. And yet, in all of those fights against people that were bigger or stronger than me, never once did I ever feel like the other guy would kill me. And yet, I was still sick just knowing what he was about to do to me. And so imagine now that you're going into a fight where your adversary can actually literally kill you. Literally kill you. That's bound to sober you up like anything else ever could, right? Like nothing else could ever sober you up. And so you can just imagine, if we allow ourselves to just feel the sheer terror that Abram must have felt as he headed into a battle that he knew he had little to no chances of surviving. Little to no chance of surviving that battle. And then get this, not only is this suicide mission already daunting, but then he somehow manages to track them up to Dan, which was about 180 kilometers away from where he was. Now just imagine that. That's a tremendous distance to cover on foot, right? In the days before Google Maps always taking you on the fastest route. And so I can only imagine what some of his mates may have felt as they went on to this pursuit, saying to Abram, Abram, we've been pursuing these guys over 90 kilometers already. And we haven't caught sight of any of them. Is this still worth our time to still keep on this pursuit? And if we catch up to them, Abram, how are we going to even defeat them? And if by some miracle we're somehow able to survive that fight, will we still find the very people that we are seeking to retrieve still alive, i.e. your nephew? And yet Abram is not deterred by it all. But he persists on this pursuit. And not only does he catch up to them, but then he proceeds to do what? Hand them their own backsides on a silver platter as he beats them down up to Hobah, the text tells us, which was another 100 kilometers away from Dan. And so then what are we seeing? We're seeing Abram triumph, hand these seemingly invincible king a decisive defeat. A decisive defeat. And then retrieving all that they had stolen in terms of bounty and setting their captors free. That's what he's able to do. Now, the big question we must ask ourselves in this text is, how did Abram manage to accomplish such a feat? How did he manage to accomplish such a feat? The same Abram that we learned about just 2 episodes ago, who was so frightened by Pharaoh. Just one king. Just one king. So afraid of just one king that he lied about his wife's true identity so that he could save his own life. And now we see him go courageously into battle, outnumbered and outpowered, into battle against a coalition of 4 kings, and exhibits such grit in grinding out such a tremendous pursuit after them. We've got to ask ourselves the question, where did he get such fortitude all of a sudden? Against all odds, to achieve what he does in the story. Well, the text gives us the answer. Look at what it says, what Melchizedek says in verses 19 to 20, when Abram returns from his triumphant victory. Here's what Melchizedek declared: "Blessed be Abram by God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth. And blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand." Delivered your enemies into your hand. And so we did learn what? That there was somebody who was gracious enough so as to empower Abram against all odds, across all those terrains, to be able to overcome what he on his own could not. And that somebody is who? God Most High. God Most High. The text at the end of verse 18 tells us that Melchizedek himself was priest of God Most High, meaning that if there was somebody who could recognize the divine gracious hand of God Most High upon somebody giving them favor, it would be Melchizedek. Which is why he declares to Abram, say, "Abram, what has happened to you was by the hand of God Most High. Blessed be you, Abram, by God Most High, because God is the one that accomplished through you what you have been able to do." And so then what are we learning? We're learning that God's unfading grace was over Abram. That he never gave up on him across all that terrain, and they never ran out on him as he pursued these kings in order to rescue his family. And so thereby affirming once again, that God's grace towards us is just truly unchanging. It is truly unchanging. Now, here's the good news of this text, which you should totally bank on in your own life. And it is this: that God's unfading grace will never run out or give up on you. That God's unfading grace will never run out or give up on you. Now, perhaps as you read that statement or hear it, you may be wondering and saying, "Sure, buddy, how could you even begin to make such an outrageous claim? You don't know me. You don't know what may be going on in my life right now. And so can you even back up such an extreme statement by declaring that God's unfading grace will never give up or run out on me. Then friend, my answer to you will be, I'm not making this statement. To you or about you. Not. It is God who reveals that about himself over you. And he reveals that. And so it is God himself who will be saying to you, listen, child, my unfading grace will never give up or run out on you. And so then where has God revealed this to us? Now sometimes it is in the small things that we can take for granted or allow to just passing things to pass where we find great gold. Like that last teeny bit of phrase at the end of verse 20. Look at it. And Abram gave him, that is Melchizedek, 1/10 of everything. Friend, it is in that phrase, a seemingly insignificant phrase that we can just allow to pass, in that phrase, that God is revealing that his unfading grace will never give up and never run out on you. Why? Because of Jesus Christ. Because of Jesus Christ. And so just stick with me for a moment as I take us there. And so Melchizedek only comes up again once in the Old Testament. And it is in Psalm 110 where he comes up. Psalm 110 is a prophecy about the coming Messiah that the people of God were longing for, waiting to come and liberate them. And so Psalm 110 prophesies that when the Messiah will come, the Messiah will not only be king over God's people, but he will also be a priest, interceding on behalf of God's people before God. And he will be a priest, the Psalm prophesies, in the order of Melchizedek. In the order of Melchizedek. And so what does that mean? It simply means that the Messiah and his priesthood will last forever. That's what it means. Now, that big theme of the priesthood of the Messiah lasting forever, the New Testament then picks up in Hebrews chapter 7. Picks up that theme and explains why does the priesthood of the Messiah will last forever, because it is in the order of Melchizedek. And so Hebrews 7 goes on to explain to us that by having offered Melchizedek back in Genesis, that tithe that Abram offers to Melchizedek, be it that Abram himself didn't actually fully understand the significance of that act, but as he offered that tithe to Melchizedek, Abram was affirming that the priesthood in the order of Melchizedek was a far greater and better one. A far greater and better one. That there would not be any greater and more effective priesthood that the children of men could rely upon to intercede on their behalf before God. That's what that small act was actually affirming. And so then when we have the Messiah being prophesied to be coming as a priest over the people of God in the order of Melchizedek, it is saying to us that the priesthood of Jesus Christ will be far greater and more effective at interceding on our behalf than any other priesthood we would ever know. Which is why then the writer of Hebrews goes on then to summarize from verse 22 saying, this makes Jesus the guarantor of a better covenant. It makes Jesus Christ the guarantor of a better covenant. For the former priests were many in number because they were prevented by death from continuing in office. And so the reason why Israel had so many priests, he's saying, was because each and every single one of them died. And so they could not rely on just one priest to keep interceding on their behalf before God, because he would die. And yet, verse 24, but he, that is Jesus, holds his priesthood permanently. Holds his priesthood permanently because he continues forever in the order of Melchizedek. And so verse 25, consequently, he, Jesus, is able to save to the uttermost those who draw near to God through him, since he always lives to make intercession for them. And so what that text is saying to us is, by having honored Melchizedek with that tithe, Abram had performed an act that will far outlast his lifetime into millennia. An act that will become a channel of God's blessing to the world, testifying to the world that God's unfading grace will never give up and never run out on us as long as Jesus Christ remains a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. That you can rest assured that the grace of God will never give up, will never run out on you because of Jesus Christ. And so then, friend, this evening, what is it in your life? What is it in your life that has got you despairing? That has got you feeling alone and abandoned in? Feeling anxious and fearful over? Catastrophizing the future into hopelessness? That you cannot pause and respond by turning to the Lord Jesus Christ, your high priest in the order of Melchizedek, who forever intercedes on your behalf before God to find the unfading grace of God that you need, that you will need, that will never give up or run out on you over whatever you're facing. God's unfading grace will never give up, never run out on you, because it rests upon Jesus Christ, your high priest in the order of Melchizedek, who is always interceding for you before the throne of God. Therefore, because of Christ Jesus, as our high priest forever in the order of Melchizedek, we can, as the writer of Hebrews exhorts us to do, let us, Hebrews 4 verse 16, let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need. You can draw near to the throne of God's grace through Christ Jesus. Through Christ Jesus. And experience the unfading grace of God that will never give up, never run out on you. And that's a promise that God intends on remaining faithful as long as Jesus Christ remains a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek on our behalf.